went to Seattle and worked Boeing, and a lot of that work involved the Strategic Defense Initiative. And they called it Star Wars. And that was kind of a bummer. I mean, that was not necessarily what I wanted to do. It wasn't designing circuits or programming hardware or anything like that. It was working on faxes and HP Unix machines. So one day, this guy who had been with the government but now worked in the private sector, he brought this clipping from the newspaper. It said, "See the world and don't have to shoot anybody."
Join the army, they said. See the world, they said. Right? Yeah.
Next to there was the ad that said, see the world, but you have to carry a gun and maybe shoot at somebody. Yeah. And then this other ad that was, you don't have to shoot people. And so my interest was piqued, and it turns out that the State Department, the peace people in the government, were looking for engineers to work on things in Washington and around the world. And it's like, I asked my spouse at the time, it's like, do you want to go live around the world? And they said, okay. Yeah.
Why not?
Yeah. So
cool. So what types of things did you work on as an electronics engineer working for the State Department? I mean, right? You think government electronics engineer, you always think spy things, right? Like CIA, spooks, or defense, right? And I'm super curious about what's going on with the State Department. Like, yeah.
Well, it was a very broad job. I was a security engineering officer. So in the Foreign Service. So Foreign Service is different from the civil service, but it's not the military, so it's kind of wedged in between. And
it's more diplomatic, yeah?
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, yeah.
Being in the State Department, definitely. Yeah. It involved embassies and consulates worldwide. And a fair amount of it was working on alarms and CCTV cameras and other electronic security systems to protect embassies and consulates. So the bad guys didn't get in. But it is known that we also were trained in the art of what they call technical security countermeasures, TSCM, which means that we knew how to use all the equipment and skills to do counter espionage. So everybody's So you were talking about things like, bugging and all this spy stuff. We would try to detect what bad guys were trying to do to the embassies and consulates and try to find it and make sure it wasn't there.
That's cool. Kind of like the anti-Q. A little?
Yeah, we didn't, there wasn't somebody handing us, a phone that, automatically zoom in and find, a bug, with just some beeps. I think Bond had some little box in Live and Let Die that did exactly.
Nice. Yeah.
It wasn't quite that easy. But yeah, that work like that took me, I lived in 5 countries around the world during my 30 years, and then the rest of the time was in Washington, and I traveled to a lot of countries and ate a lot of good food and saw a lot of interesting things. And
cool. Cool. And you also rose there to a pretty big management position where you were overseeing serious budgets and a lot of people and things like that too, yeah?
Mm-hmm. So about halfway in, I was put in charge of our logistics and did some revamp on that, and kind of rose through management. My last overseas assignment was in Frankfurt, and I was managing all the security engineering in Europe with, I had about 150 people. And then I came back to Washington. And when I retired, I was managing a group of 500 people worldwide with a budget of $261 million.
Nice.
And
Nice.
so I'd been promoted throughout my career, and in 2012 I was promoted to the senior foreign service, which is the equivalent of the senior service in the civilian, and also equivalent to general level in the military. So
Was it still fun at that point, or did it start to get, I don't know. I mean, you're very much into hardware now, and there's always this struggle, I feel, with engineers as they move forward, as they progress through their careers, of do I stay technical or do I go into management? And it is rare that you can kind of do both.
you're exactly right. And I had colleagues who did not want to manage. I mean, and so they rose up to a certain level and they couldn't go any higher. There wasn't a parallel path for people that wanted to do that in the State Department. I found I liked managing. I had enough hands-on with a lot of security equipment. And it was kind of funny, when about the time I was promoted, I did want to get my hands on some hardware, and I learned through some Googling about Arduinos. And I found this book, Making Things Talk by Tom Igoe, who is one of the Arduino founders, Making Things Talk. And I walked around with that book for like 2 weeks solid, oogling the fact that you could buy boards from SparkFun and Adafruit and all these, hook them up and make things and program them. And I could use my C knowledge and get in there. And I just, that blew my mind. So I guess I was managing on one side, and then at home I was at the workbench tinkering. So that's how I kind of balanced it myself.
Nice. So yeah, so you did that and then decided to not do it anymore, or what led to the next phase of your life?
Career-wise, I'd been working with Adafruit. We can do that separately, or we could get into that part before.
No, let's do it right now, and then we'll talk some circus playgrounds and stuff. Yeah.
Okay. So I started doing projects, and Fruit has their show and tell program. And I think I got on and started showing some things. I'm not sure exactly the timing, but about that time they came out. I mean, at that time to buy an Uno was about $30.
Yeah.
And at that time I wasn't investing, we have a family and responsibilities, and you're not going to be buying, half a dozen $30 boards to tinker with necessarily, especially when you're not 100% sure you're totally into it. You're kind of So Adafruit decided to come out at the time with an AT Tiny, I'll just do it up here, based board called the Trinket. And it only cost, I believe, $10, and then it eventually went down to about $7, I think. And so I could get 3 of these for one Uno, because I used an Uno or two, and then it went into a project, and then I didn't have an Uno to play with. So I started wanting to use these, but I found limitations, and that you've likely run into with some chips is that, the AT Tiny 85, for example, it does not program the exact same way as a Atmega 328. Not just the flash and RAM. It's all the little timers and peripherals and everything. It was pretty different. So I started going online, and then there's AVR forums, and it's kind of, they don't like the Arduino folk. There's just, it was trying to navigate, and, so I found code online, and I was trying it and doing things, and I think I showed some on show and tell, and so I had Adafruit's eye, and they were interested. I don't think they had a lot of people making trinket projects and then showing them. So they asked me just kind of ad hoc if I would write tutorials based on what I'd done on a project.
Cool.
And it's like, yeah. And then I had to check with State Department, make sure there's no conflict of interest or blah, blah. And they were cool with it all. So I started doing tutorials, and I started that from 2013 on, just kind of off and on based on their products. Sometimes they would ask me if I might do something, or I might suggest to them a project, and I'd write about it. And the trinket ones kind of came to a head when Make got in contact with them and said, would Adafruit write a book on the trinket?
Yeah.
And Lamore Freed and Phil Terone, wonderful people, heading up a really great company. They don't have a lot of free time to write books.
Yeah.
But they're more than willing, if somebody, is looking for a book on a subject, is to try to recommend people in the community, in the maker community, who might have expertise or desire to do that. So they've done that for a number of things.
Mm-hmm.
So they said, would I like to write a book? And it's like, okay, I've never written a book, but the liberal arts stuff coupled with the diplomacy stuff gave me some pretty good skills.
Right? You actually had a lot of the necessary experience without maybe it being directly doing that thing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And, I'll freely admit in high school and early college, I was not a person who loved English class and all that, but I got through it and I did okay. But I really kind of honed things when the diplomats really wanted things in specific formats, reports or telegrams or whatever, so it was kind of do or die. So it was 2014. So Make published my book on trinket.
Woohoo!
And I went to Maker Faire, and they had pre-release copies, and I gave a talk and signed some, and it was like, wow, cool. So I was kind of hooked by then, it's like, I'm programming microcontrollers and C and hardware and wiring things up. It's like I found that groove that balanced what I was doing at work. I could scratch both things at the same time. So
nice.
Life was good, but there's always a lot.
Yeah.
Coming around to about 2018, my career was kind of wrapping up, kind of pigeonholed due to politics, and I'd been in for quite a while. So Adafruit invited me to New York, and we went to MoMA. Some really cool stuff. They had a exhibit on computing design. That's where they had the computing machine, the one with all the blinky lights. It was just fabulous. And then we went to dinner, and over dinner they asked if I might want to work for Adafruit.
Nice.
Yeah. So
cool.
I said I have to crunch a few numbers and scratch my head. And it didn't take too long to say sure, and then I arranged to retire from the government, and in April of 18, I started full time with Adafruit, and haven't looked back. It's been wonderful.